Hey everyone, it's Ollie and welcome to your 8th intermediate game programming tutorial in Java. Now in this tutorial we're going to be carrying on with the threads and sleeping and stuff, and I was messing about with the code, so if this looks different from where we left off, I apologise. Try and just copy down what I have. But I was fiddling around with it, and we're going to do this a slightly different way. We're going to just delete this last else statement we made, because we're going to be checking for three different things. First of all, we're going to be checking if the thread is allowed to sleep. In other words, if these three things completed within the period, which was 6 milliseconds, then we can happily sleep. So I'm just going to add a comment here saying if the sleep time is between 0 and the period, we can happily sleep. Alright, and then now after this we're going to add another comment, because what if these didn't complete within the period and the sleep time came out as a negative number because of that? It's not going to enter this one because one of the conditions is sleep time must be greater than 0, and we don't want the statement we're about to write to be entered after this has been entered, so we're going to make it an else if statement to make sure any one of them is entered at once. So we're going to say the diff was greater than the period. So then we can add else if. The difference is greater than the period. So if diff is greater than the period, in other words, just one sec. In other words, if these three things here took longer than 6 milliseconds, that means the sleep time would have come out as a negative number, because 6 minus, we'll say 10, would equal minus 4. So if the difference was greater than the period, then we want to say oversleep time equals the difference minus the period. So say this did take 10 milliseconds to complete, then that means this is negative, which means this isn't entered, so it looks to the next condition. Was the difference greater than the period? Yes, it was. So we're going to say the oversleep time is equal to, just let's say 10 in this case, minus 6, which is what the period was, and that will give us 4. So next time it comes round, if this completes in the correct amount of time, this will minus the oversleep time, so we still can't sleep because we're catching up on time we missed. And I'm going to fully go over this afterwards. I'm going to run through an enormous example just to drill it into your brains how it works, because I remember when I first saw this kind of thing, it was confusing to stay on top of. So don't worry, stick to the end of the video. I will explain what this all means. So let me actually we need to make one more thing after this, but it's not going to make sense unless I explain to you now. So let's go through as if it was actually happening. So let's run our program, and we're moving in epic slow motion because programs run as fast as they possibly can. So it's going to update the game, render it, paint the screen. Let's say the first time off, assuming you know how before time and after time makes the difference. Hopefully you should. Just the time after these complete minus the time before they'd started equals how long it took to do those. So let's assume the first time it took 3 milliseconds to complete. That means the sleep time equals the period, which is 6, minus 3, which is 3, minus the oversleep time, which is 0 up here, because it's the first time the loops run anyway. So that means we have 3. So is the sleep time less than the period? Yes, it is. And is it greater than 0? Yeah, 3 is greater than 0. So we can come in here and we can say sleep for the 3 milliseconds, and we divide by the 1 million because we were working in nanoseconds up here, and this is to convert it into milliseconds. So, and because this is an else if, because it's entered this statement, it's going to ignore this, so we can start the loop again. So what if this time this took 10 milliseconds to complete? So the difference is now equal to 10 milliseconds. So the sleep time is equal to the period, which is 6, minus the difference, which was 10, which means the sleep time is now minus 4 because oversleep time is still 0. So is sleep time less than the period? -4 is less than 6, but it's not greater than 0, so we don't enter this. We will now look into the next else if statement, and it says, is the difference greater than the period? Well, 10 was greater than 6, so yes. So over sleep time is equal to 10 minus 6, which equals 4. And now that over sleep time equals 4, we can start this loop again. Let's assume this took 3 milliseconds to complete again. So the difference now equals 3 milliseconds. The sleep time equals the period, which is 6, minus 3, which is 3, but minus the oversleep time, which was 4 from the last time. That gives us -1, which is still a negative number. So is the sleep time less than the period? Yes, but it's still not greater than 0. So we'll move on to the next statement. Was the difference greater than the period? No, it wasn't. The difference was only 3. So now we need a third else if statement for if there was some oversleep time, but the difference is not greater than the period. We want to say accumulate, if that's how you spell it. I don't know how to spell that. Whatever. Accumulate the amount of delays and eventually yield. So if you don't know what that means, we're going to do that now. So else if, and we'll get that ready to set up, but we need to make another variable for now. Come all the way to the top in our global variables, and with our game variables here, our nicely commented out section up here, we can say private integer. Also, this can be static final, we don't need it to change. Private integer called, let's call it delays before yield. Delays before yield. And now we give it a value, so in other words, how many times should our loop delay before we can yield the thread? Let's say 10. So let's come down here, and now in our run method, at the start, before the loop begins, we can create another variable integer called delays, and this can be equal to 0 initially. And now we can say else if ++ delays. That adds one every time this is looked at. It will add one to the delays. So if the delays is greater than or equal to the, well, I've forgotten what we've called it already. Delays before yield. Delays before yield. There we go. So if this statement has been, in other words, if this statement has been reached 10 times, which is what our delays before yield was, then we can say game.yield. And that pauses the thread temporarily and allows other stuff to run. So if this has been reached 15 times, it means that our game is sort of falling behind a little bit. The threads are struggling to keep up. So if we manage to reach this, we're just going to let it stop for a while, let other threads do stuff, and then it will start up again shortly after. So if after we've done this, we then need to set delays back to 0. And now we need to rig our oversleep time, because we need to reset it to 0 every now and then. So if our game can successfully sleep, we can set the oversleep time back to 0. Let me just check my time here. We're going good, I think. Nearly on 10 minutes. So if our, let's see. So if we can sleep successfully, then our oversleep time can reset to 0. If this is reached, if there's delays before yield, we can set oversleep time back to 0 as well. We don't set it here because obviously we're setting the oversleep time there. And then we can finally have an else statement. So else. So in other words, if the difference wasn't greater than the period in the example we discussed earlier, then it's going to look at this and it's going to add one to the delays, but this condition won't be true on the second time round. So this isn't going to run, but it will still add one to the delays thing. So it's going to finally come to else. It's going to, alright, there's nothing left to do except go into this else statement, and then we can just say in this else statement, oversleep time can equal 0 again. So now that that is all done, I'm just going to add a comment here so you guys can clarify. So what is it? The loop took less time than expected, but we need to make up for the oversleep time. So anyways, now that we've done this, we're not going to see anything very visually pleasing. It looks basically exactly the same, but the code behind it has made this just 10 times better as a game and as an engine. But what I'm going to do is now I'm going to quickly program a nice sort of log for us to set out the stats really nicely. So I'm going to, if you remember beforehand, we had this method at the bottom called log, and it just prints out system out print line. It's just a much easier way of doing it. Well, I've lost my place. Here we go. So print out game stats, and I accidentally removed a bracket there. There we go. Print out game stats. We can say log, and let's hit enter here. Give it some space, and we can tab in. And now we can print out some nice statements here. So we can say, basically print out everything there is before time, and then plus the before time, then add a line break. I'm already keeping you for too long, so let's just do this quickly. After time plus after time plus a line break. Hopefully you know what I'm doing. If you don't know what I'm doing, this here is going to show up in the output window down here, and then we'll see it in just a second when I run the game. What else do we need after time? The difference plus the difference plus a line break, and then we need the sleep time plus the sleep time, but let's convert it back to milliseconds. 123 123 divide it by a million, and then add a line break, and then we can say oversleep time, although we won't really see a visual stat for this because it will update too quickly for us to see. We can just print it out anyway. And when you're making Java programs, logging like this is an incredibly effective way to debug your program in case anything's going wrong, so you can literally see live view of your stats. So now last thing we'll print out is the delays, and finally add a line break, and that is all done. So I'm going to bring this right up now, and we're going to see a lovely representation of our game. So we've got our game up, but I don't really need to show you. So there we've got our live stats being printed out, before time, after time, and as you can see, the sleep time is on an average of around 2 and 3, sometimes it goes up to 4, and then when you see it suddenly flicker to a minus number, you see the delays go up, and we'll just wait for the delay to get to 10, so I'll show you, though it reset. If you just saw there, it got to 10 and then it reset, so the thread had yielded to make room for other threads to start. But that is pretty much it, guys. In case you're wondering, in case you're a little confused about the implementation of the thread and stuff, if you want this map to move faster, you can come up here and all you have to do is change this period, this 6 number here. I can make it 2, and then if I drag this up again and press run, you can see that we're getting, the map moves a lot faster, but because of the way we programmed it, 2 isn't a very effective number, because the sleep time can only be 1 or 2, and that's not likely. So the delays will go up lots, and the thread will end up yielding a lot. So I'm just going to keep this at 6. And later on we'll be programming our player and other such stuff, but I've already kept you for like 15 minutes. So guys, thanks for watching this tutorial. Hopefully this made sense. I'll put this finished source code. Actually, no, I'll try and put the start source code for this on the forums. If you go to the Java source code section and then intermediate Java source code, you guys know where it is. So Anyway, please subscribe guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.